Hello, everyone. Hi, good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining the webinar today. Today we'll be talking about how to conduct a data privacy impact assessment. I'll give a couple of seconds for other people to join in. Once again, thank you for joining the webinar today. Please feel free to type in any questions you may have during the session into the question section. We'll be having a question and answer portion at the end of the session today, and I'll be happy to answer all your questions. And if there are any questions I probably can't answer immediately due to time, or maybe it's an in-depth question, our details will be shared at the end so that you can send in an email and the conversation can continue. Once again, thank you for joining the webinar. I'll start off with a short introduction of who we are. We're an elite group of information security governance and risk compliance specialists. We're known as Risk Crew, and we've implemented a number of projects, in diverse sectors such as in the defense, health, finance sector, and being confident of our expertise and the diversity of the expertise we do have in Risk Crew, we do offer 100% satisfaction guarantee. For me, my name is Ursula. My name is Ursula Baye. And I've run a number of information security risk and compliance projects over 15 years, apparently, with a specialty in data protection and information security management systems. And today I'll be taking you through how to actually run a data privacy impact assessment. To start off with a data privacy impact assessment, the first thing I think we need to do is actually define what a DPIA is. A DPIA is a type of a risk assessment, and this type of risk assessment assesses the impact of the processing activities and the impact it could have on data subjects. This process helps us to identify and minimize the data protection risks of a project. To be able to go through this comprehensively today, we're going to talk about the requirements of a DPIA, what is actually required to come out of a DPIA, the objective of the DPIA, and because it's so process-based, what skills, experience, and tools are needed. Hopefully, during the webinar, we'll be able to review an example of a completed DPIA and talk about who should actually be involved in seeing the results, who needs to see the results, what's the impact the result could have. And then at the end of that, we'll now have a question and answer session. I hope all of you are interested, are going to take part in the question and answer session. That'll be quite interesting because in as much as we're going to have a very comprehensive session here, the questions and answers may bring out more than what we've actually talked about. Now, what is the goal and objective of having a DPIA? First of all, we need to ensure compliance with an applicable regulatory, legal, and policy requirements for privacy, to determine the risks and effects of the project or whatever process we're doing the DPIA on, and to evaluate protection and alternative processes to mitigate potential privacy risks. Now, during your DPIA, if you do a privacy impact assessment on a particular process and it does have a high risk, sometimes you can go through it and ask, is that the only process you can use, or is there an alternative to that? Now, for the requirement of DPIA, the Article 35 clearly states the DPI must provide and contain a systematic description of processing operations and the purposes of the processing, including, where applicable, where there's legitimate interest that is pursued by the controller, an assessment of the necessity and proportionality of the processing operations in relation to the purposes, an assessment of the risks to the rights and freedoms of data subjects, and the mitigating measures. Now, after you've identified the risks, you should be able to clearly identify the mitigating measures you're going to put into place. Are you going to put into place what safeguards are you going to put into place? What security measures will be put into place, mechanisms in order to ensure the protection of personal data, and also to demonstrate compliance with this regulation, considering the rights and legitimate interests of data subjects and other persons concerned. Now, when you look at all the requirements of the DPI, you see the first thing is that there must be a complete description of the processing operations and the purpose. And in that, you now have to now put like a proportionality balance. What you're doing, the process you're doing, is it actually necessary for the purpose in which you have stated it's necessary for? And then to assess the risks to the rights and freedoms of data subjects. So you see that the DPIA follows the principles of the data protection over the personal data subjects. And this question always comes up: when is a DPIA mandatory? Is it always mandatory? It's not always mandatory, but it is recommended. At all times, it is recommended. But Article 35 does state particular processes that the DPIA is mandatory. And then you have them written here that you must do a DPIA where a type of processing is likely to result in high risk to the rights and freedoms of the individual. The types of processing listed here are systematic and extensive profiling with significant effects, the large-scale use of sensitive data, a systematic monitoring of a publicly accessible area on a large scale. Here, the type of processing in particular using new technologies, taking into account the nature, the scope, context, and purposes of the processing, which is likely to result in high risks. In this time, the controller, which we would like to say the organization, the controller, whoever is in charge of the data, prior to processing should carry out an assessment of the impact on the individual, any systematic and extensive evaluation of personal aspects which relates to natural persons, which is based on automated processing. That is a big one that must always include a DPI, which includes profiling. And on which decisions are based, which may produce legal effects concerning the natural person. So when you have something that involves profiling, it's going to, and the profiling of this is going to determine whether that person is possibly applicable or eligible for anything, or that profiling is going to result in that person being sidelined or not eligible, then it is definitely these kind of processes that do automatically require a DPI to be done on them. Having said all that, you can see now that the DPI is process-based. One of the first aspects of the DPI is to know and understand the process which you are trying to do the impact assessment upon. And in order to do that, it's important to be able to extract the right kind of information from stakeholders that know the process in order to be able to assess the impact it will have on data subjects properly. Now, in order to do that, you must have the right and relevant skills in which to interview stakeholders in order to be able to identify the assets involved, the location, the classification level, and the intended use of this data. In order, when you say, okay, when someone may ask you, what do you mean by skills to interview stakeholders? Do you know the right questions that you need to ask to get the right kind of information? Very often conducting DPI requires engaging a broad number of actors within the system. And a lot of times the experience that is needed here with people that have the experience in security and privacy with the DPA framework, the DPA goals and objectives, risk assessment, because you must remember that the DPIA is a type of a risk assessment where you're able to identify vulnerabilities that are associated with the people, the process, and with the technology as well. A DPIA must be conducted with people with profound knowledge, skills, and expertise in security and privacy. Excel is the most Excel templates. Excel templates are the most recommended tool for this type of thing, but there are open source or commercial tools available. Really, what we're looking for is a tool that can identify an asset, the value of that asset, the owner, the location, the vulnerability, the threat, likelihood, impact, and the remedial action. Some samples of a commercial software is Vigilant. We have the open source PIA. It's worthy to note that, when you're looking for, okay, who are the relevant stakeholders to interview, who are the relevant people in which you need to talk to be able to get the information you need in order to be able to assess the process. It's actually the data protection officer's duty to help in identifying the key persons and to also assist in the process of conducting a DPIA. What I'm trying to say here is the DPO does not necessarily have to be the person to conduct a DPIA. That's because a good DPIA requires input, not only technical input such as documents, designs, and requirements, but also input from people who actually hold major responsibility in the project that is about to take place or is taking place. Among the stakeholders that you can find, you could mention that need to be involved in this are people like the project managers, the CIO, the CISO, the data protection officer himself, application developers, users, etc. People basically that have the knowledge of technical and organizational constraints. So you can see that, in carrying out a DPIA, sometimes even identifying the stakeholders is a major part of the DPIA. You have to identify the stakeholders. At what level what kind of knowledge do you need from them? How do you need to keep them informed? Basically, a very good stakeholder analysis goes a long way in making your DPIA what it's meant to be, as comprehensive as possible, because every little information concerning that process helps. The way one department or one part of the process may impact a data, may impact PII may be different from the way another part may impact it as well. A fun fact. Let's take a fun fact here. Did you know that PIAs have existed since the 1980s? Who was the first country to develop a PIA methodology? Did you get the question? I hope people are answering. Should I repeat that question? PIAs have existed since the 1980s. Who was the first country to develop a PIA methodology? It was actually the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom was the first country in Europe to develop a PIA methodology. The ICO first published a PIA handbook over 10 years ago in December of 2007. 100% of everyone answered USA to that, but no, it was the United Kingdom. Oh, woo, something to be proud of here. So the United Kingdom was the first country to develop a PIA methodology, and it was the handbook was first published 10 years ago in December 2007. So now we're going into the nitty-gritty of this. 7 steps to a DPIA. These are the steps that are needed in order to get a comprehensive DPIA, something that can be used. And the first step is to identify the need for a DPIA. What is it about the process, and what is that categorical characteristic you're going to say that this is the reason why you need to carry out a DPIA? You have to describe the processing. What is the process that we're doing the assessment on, the consultation process. You have to assess the necessity and proportionality, identify and assess risks, and then you have to identify measures to reduce the risk. Now you have to sign off and record outcomes because there must be an agreement with what you've put down, because people are actually responsible for the actions that need to take place for a DPIA. Now we're going to take at each step one by one and see what it entails. First of all, to identify the need for a DPIA, the first step sets the pace really, where you have to explain broadly what the project aims to achieve. What is the aim of that project? What type of processing it involves? A helpful step here would be to refer or link to other documents involved in the project, such as the project proposal. This enables you to summarize why that DPIA is needed. And you have to know that a DPI is needed when you plan to embark on a new project involving the collection of personal data, introduce new IT systems for storing and assessing personal information, participate in a new data sharing initiative with other organizations. That is so key, sharing data with other organizations, initiate action based on a policy of identifying particular demographics, using existing data for a new or unexpected or more intrusive purpose. With the DPI, is also very important you have to state what the purpose is of that process, and it is ideal to stick to that purpose. Then review or audit an existing system or activity. So all these things, all these are the kinds of things, processes that you'll be undertaking that actually need a DPI. But the first step of a DPI is to identify the reason you need that DPI. What is it that causes you to need that DPI to take place? Then you have to describe the nature of describe the processing of the data. How will you collect the data, use it, and store it? What is the source of that data? Will you be sharing the data with anyone? And that when it comes to that, will you be sharing the data with anyone? In this part of the DPI process, I don't know if any of you on this webinar attended our last webinar that was handled by Andy Whitaker. That webinar showed a data flow mapping process, which is highly useful in when you're able to describe, you have a flow diagram that describes exactly how your data flows. Then you're able to pinpoint, the data points there and what types of processing identified are likely to have high risks involved in them. Now, when you describe the scope of the data here, what we're talking about, what is the nature of the data, and does it include special category or criminal offense data? How much data will you be collecting and using, and how often? How long will you keep it? Retention is so key. How many individuals are affected, and what geographical area does it cover? You also need to describe the context. What is the nature of your relationship with individuals, and will those individuals actually have control? How much control will they have over this data that you're collecting? Are they aware of what you're using their data for? Does the data include children or other vulnerable groups? Are there any other prior concerns over the type of processing? Are there security flaws that you have identified before, in any form of way? What is the current state of technology in this area? And then last but not the least, you have to describe the purpose of this processing. What do you want to achieve with what you're collecting? What is the intended effect on the individuals, and what are the benefits of the processing for you, or more broadly for any other person? So this step, you can see, is quite detailed, where we have to say the nature of the data you're collecting, how you collect it, what is the scope of the data, and the context of the relationship you have with the people that you're collecting the data from, your data subjects, and the purpose of what goal is to be achieved from this. Here you have to consider how to consult with relevant stakeholders. Remember earlier on, I told you that stakeholder analysis is key. Are you getting the right information from the right people? You have to describe when and how you will seek the individual's view or justify why it's not appropriate to do so. Are you leaving? So why? Who else do you think you need to involve within your organization? You know, do you need to ask your processors to assist that? Are you working with third party? Do you need to ask your processors to assist with any of this? Do you plan to consult with information security experts or any other experts whatsoever? This stage, you explain everything you're going to do concerning the consultation process. Here you assess the necessity and proportionality. What is your lawful basis for processing? And does this processing actually achieve your purpose? Is there any other way to achieve the same outcome? Is there any other way to achieve? How will you prevent function creep? If you've collected data for one particular purpose, how are you going to prevent that data you've collected being used for a purpose you've not stated at all? How will you ensure data quality and data minimization? That is collecting only the data you do need. What information are you going to give individuals? How will you help to support their rights, their individual rights? What measures do you take with processors to comply? How do you safeguard international transfers? All this needs to be stated clearly on this stage. Another fun fact, and I do hope everybody gets involved in this one, if you're on this, you've been in, either you're working, in data or you're interested in working in data, but what are the 5 characteristics of data quality? I believe the poll is, what are the 5 characteristics of data quality? It's just a bit of fun. Okay. The 5 characteristics of data quality are accuracy, completeness, reliability, relevance, and timeliness. Accuracy is when the information must be correct. Completeness, refers to how comprehensive the information is. Reliability is that a piece of information doesn't contradict another piece of information in a different source or system. You have to make sure that the data you've put in there is reliable. Relevance comes into play because there has to be a good reason as to why you're collecting the information in the first place. And timeliness refers to how up-to-date the information you've gotten is. Where failure to have a strong foundation of good, accurate data could be a risk. Data quality actually plays a critical role in wider GDPR requirements, where you have the dreaded subject of subject access, the dreaded topic of subject access requests and data quality and breach. That's why it is so important that we do have our data quality on point with accuracy, completeness, reliability, relevance, and timeliness. So that was a bit of fun. And yeah, 70% of us got that right. 70% of us got that right. Okay, so now we get to another part of it where you identify and assess the risks. What potential impact is the process going to have on individuals? Here you have to describe the source of any risk that you've identified, the nature of the potential impact on individuals, which include associated compliance and corporate risks as necessary. Usually it is, you have to find out the likelihood of harm. Is there a chance of harm actually taking place? Is the chance remote? Is it possible or probable? What is the severity of the harm if the risk actually does become, Is it minimal? Is it significant or severe? And is the overall risk of the process, is it low, medium, or high? I must mention here that if you do have a process and you've done all the risks involved and you find that you have a major high risk, the whole project will be termed as a high risk project or high risk process. Then you have to identify measures in which to reduce risks. Identify the additional measures you could take to reduce or eliminate risks as identified, in the former step, 5. Is the risk high? What options are there to reduce or eliminate? Are the effects the effects of the risks you've identified, are they going to be completely eliminated with the measures you put in place? Are they going to be reduced, or is the risk going to be accepted? Now the residual risk level, is it high, medium, or low? And then, is the measure that you've put in place, that safety measure you've put in place, is it an approved measure or is it not? Usually what we're looking for is a measure that you've brought about and it has been approved. But here you have to state it that the measure you have brought about actually has been approved. Then you have the sign off, where you sign off and you have to get for measures approved, and measures approved must be, you have to integrate the actions back into the action plan. So it's important that you see that the measures that you put on there on approved risks, on the on risks, when you've gotten your measures that you're going to use on risk, these measures, when they are approved, these actions that have to be taken have to be integrated back into the project plan. And not just that, they have to be integrated into the project plan with a date and a responsibility for completion. Residual risks are approved. If accepting any residual risk, sometimes it is necessary to consult the ICO before going ahead. The data protection officer also provides notes to advise on compliance and measures and whether the processing can actually the data protection officer has to advise whether the process should actually take place based on his own advice of compliance. And it is also possible for the data protection officer's advice to be overruled. So it must be mentioned in your report whether this is the advice that was given, has it been accepted or overruled? And you have to record all consultation responses, and if your decision differs from other individuals' views, and explain the reasons why. All these things need to be recorded, especially at this outcome reason, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to show in this section is that, yes, we've carried out the DPIA, we've identified the risks, and we've brought out outcomes concerning the risk. We've brought out measures, but have they been approved? And if they've not been approved, why have they not been approved? And if there's a discrepancy in opinions, why is there that discrepancy there? And then which way has been the final decision on which to go has been decided? Now it comes to this: who should see the results of the DPIA? We must take note here that the DPIA is not simply a rubber stamp or a technicality as part of a sign off, or just something, okay, it's a process we need to sign off. It's vital to remember that the results of the DPIA, the outcome must be worked back into your project plan, as I've mentioned before. The DPIA should not be viewed as a one-off exercise that you just file away. It is a living process, which helps you to manage and review the risks of the processing and the measures you've put in place on an ongoing basis. So who should see the results? Within the organization, availability of the results should actually be organization-wide, so that everybody is able to see that this process, this is how it has been assessed. those involved in the project, is absolutely important that they get to see it. You can't be involved in a project and you've not seen the DPIA. You're the one involved, you're the one that needs to take the steps, you know, to make sure that if measures have been put in place, they are actually carried out. And if people are about to start, another project team possibly is about to start a project that is similar in nature, it also helps them, you know, when they go through the DPI, it gives them a bigger start on what they're going out on. Now, carrying out a DPIA and informing, you know, outside the organization, you know, the GDPR doesn't state that the DPIA results are compulsory to be shared, but, you know, carrying out a DPIA and informing about it often strengthens the, you know, the individual's trust in the data processing and consequently in the organization. And this gives a great advantage for the organization, you know, because what you're showing is transparency of your results, and it also shows, you know, that you're confident or you're sure of your footing on what you're doing. You know, we have some organizations that impose a stricter rule on themselves than what the GDPR actually requires in order to be more transparent about what they do. And another thing to also consider is that when you do publish your DPIA, other organizations that might be similar, other organizations that you might or might not work with, or eventually could come to work with, they also benefit from your published DPIA. So as I said before, it is not compulsory or mandatory to publish your DPIA results outside the organization, but it is recommended, as it is, you know, it shows transparency, it builds trust and confidence in what your company does represent. Now, at the end of the main purpose of a DPIA, what was the main purpose is to assess any risks that might come up from the data processing and then to address them. So at the end of the DPIA, the greatest question you can ask yourself is, did you achieve what you meant to achieve? Did you achieve your objectives and your goals? The consistent use of DPIA increases the awareness of privacy and data protection issues within your organization. So it is highly recommended, you know, that, when I was talking about the results, that it should be organization-wide, when people are aware of what is happening. So everybody becomes aware of the importance of data protection, which makes it that your issues arising are less. And the DPIA brings broader benefits, compliance benefits. An effective DPIA allows you to identify and fix problems at an early stage, and bringing broader benefits for both individuals and your organization. And another thing a DPIA does, especially for the ROI, your bottom line, it has financial benefits. You know, when you're able to identify a problem early on, generally means a simpler and less costly solution, as well as avoiding any potential reputational damage later on. And it also reduces the ongoing cost of a project by minimizing the amount of information you collect where possible. And also, when you're able to identify things easier, it just makes the process more straightforward for yourself and for staff, you know. So here is the sample DPI template. And at the end of the session, if you do download the slides, I believe the slides will be sent to you. There is a link that enables you to download the template. The template is from the ICO. It's the most recommended slide template that we've got. I don't know if we have time to go through a sample. I don't know if we've got time to go to a sample. Let me see. Are there any questions there? Okay, let's see if I can get a sample up and running. Just a minute. If I can get that up. Can you see my screen? Do I have a sample up there? Okay, so here is the I'm going to you're going to see on this sample that I've got up is some information has been blocked out. That is because of client confidentiality. And but this is how it starts off. You know, there's a sample DPI template from the ICO, where the name of the controller obviously is you, the subject or title of the data protection officer, and this name of controller contact only differs if this one is different, so you delete as appropriate. You know, we've gone through the 7 steps, so as much as I can, I'll go through everything that was answered here. It says identify the need for a DPIA. As I said before, this is where you broadly explain what the project aims to achieve, and you must end up summarizing why you identify the need for a DPIA. You know, you can see like it's a summary. You know, we are currently in the process of replacing a legacy system. So these people are about to replace a legacy system. They state here clearly that the system no longer meets the needs of the organization. They state what the new system is and what it encompasses. They also state here that there is a separate information asset register and a DPI report. You see, so here you can see that they have an asset register, a DPI report, possibly from an old project, and the links will be added here so that they can refer to it. So you see the importance of publishing your DPI result, at least for organization-wide, everybody needs to see it. And this part that it states here that is a time-bound activity, tells us exactly when the DPI is going to be taking place. And it says here, DPI specifically addresses, it shows the scope here is limited to the data migration activity from our old legacy system and related data sources into the new management. So, you know, they've set the scope. And here where I've highlighted is a sentence that directly addresses identify the need for a DPI. And it says here, a DPI is required because we are handling and processing personal data as we migrate data into the new management system. I had to highlight that bit because it just shows, you know, yes, they've given a preamble, they've explained certain things, but this clearly states why they need the DPIA. Then here they are asked to describe the nature of their processing, how they collect, use, and store the data. So you see, they gave under collection, they've stated exactly where they're going to collect the data from. Here they stated that they're not collecting any fresh personal data. They are only extracting from the old system to the new system. They've explained the usage of the data, what it's going to be used for. Storage, where it's going to be stored, how long they're going to keep the data and how it will be deleted, who they're sharing the data with. You see, like in their case, there are 3 main parties involved in this data migration activity. They stated that organizational staff, and they've got 2 processors here who are sharing the data. It has to be clearly stated here. Then, you know, the scope of the process. Then here we have the scope of the processing, which starts off again with the nature of the data being processed, you know. And it says here, all data being migrated relates to applications that fall under requests, you know, and subsequent requests. But then it now states the data they're looking for, the organization details, contact details, payment details, file attachments. So all those are stated there. They are migrating data only for open projects per se. So they state it here. So any other projects, so we're going to assume that any projects that are not open are not going to be, you know, used here. You see, when it talks about special category data, they stated here, even if they are not collecting special category data, they said as part of data migration activity, we are not collecting or migrating any special category data. So you see that their DPIA is quite detailed, telling you exactly what they're going to do with the data, how long they'll be keeping it for. You can see in different stages of the data here, they have links to other reports that helps them sort of see the similarities or differences. So obviously, when they were taking out this DPIA, it made it more easy to understand the process based on what the organization does, because other processes, they could look at other processes and say the context of the data. You see, it says here the context of processing is very limited: extracting, cleaning, removing duplicate records, and uploading. Customers have a reasonable expectation that we'll store data. So, you know, they can say this based on what they have in their policy, in their privacy policy, and what the customers do know. And you must remember that is a migration they're doing from one system to another. And you see here, they state here, our approach to data migration is in line with our privacy policy and data protection privacy policy, publicly available on the organization's website. So you see, they've made it clear where it's available to go and see, and to see that what they are doing goes in line with what they've stated they will do. You know, here it says, describe the purposes of the processing. What do you want to achieve? What is the intended effect on individuals? You know, and they've told us clearly the purpose of the data migration is to enable them continue operating existing projects, to enable them report on historic data, to provide relevant historic data to project, you know. And here they state the effect, the impact it will have if they do not do this. It says here, without the data migration activity, we would have to find a way to continue operating the current system for current and historic projects and the new management system. And they state the effect it will have. This will be complex, risky, and expensive. And all that was just step 2, where we're describing the processing itself. Everything I've gone through now was just the identification of why the need of the DPI was, and then the process explanation. Then here you have the consultation process, and it tells us here who is going to lead the team, supported by data and IT teams. Staff have been consulted throughout the design and development. Then it tells us from a data privacy perspective, the service design received ongoing support from the organization's DPO. So it states clearly who was involved, who were the stakeholders they involved in this process. Then here it says, describe compliance and proportionality measures in particular. What is your lawful basis for processing? Why do you need to process? I know it states here the reason they're going to use the data, how they've ensured data quality. Remember, we asked what is data quality? What are the 5 characteristics of data quality? And they stated it clearly what they've done to ensure data quality, data minimization. Did they just collect what they needed? They said this is the purpose in which they need the data. Is that the only thing? How did they prevent scope creep? In other words, how are they preventing using this data they said they're collecting? It should be used for only this purpose and not another purpose. Processor compliance. Here they tell us that GDPR provisions are built into supplier contracts and where it is held by, how they've protected international transfers. And here I took out most of the risks they identified. I had to just keep it to the barest minimum just to be able to show you an example here. It says, describe the source of risk and nature of potential impact on individuals. Remember, I said it needs to include associated compliance and corporate risk as necessary. And here, there's a possibility. They said that let me just take one through. Insecure sharing and handling of data extracts results in personal data being leaked, contact details, as well as fraud markers for some individuals and organizations. They've identified a risk. They said the likelihood of harm is possible. The severity of harm is severe. If it does happen, what happens, but the overall risk is medium. Now they've identified and assessed a particular risk. And then they've given us an option to reduce or eliminate the risk. And they stated here that they'll share data extracts only via access restricted network drives. So they've stated here also no hard copy printout. So you see there are rules and there are measures that have been put in place here in order to either eliminate or reduce the risk. And they said the effect it have on the risk is reduced and the residual risk is actually low at the end of the day. So now they have to state here, was the measure they've put in place, was it approved or not? And here is where you do the sign off and you sign off and record the outcomes. You see, when I said that everybody has, you have to do this because you now know who is responsible for what. So the measures were approved by who it was. And then what does the person need to do? You see here, the person has an action, integrate actions back into the project plan with date and responsibility for completion. So every action here has to go back into the project plan and every action has to be given to someone who will be responsible for that. Residual risks, was the residual risk approved? If accepting any residual high risk, remember I told you that if your residual high risk is high, the ICO must be consulted before going ahead. Then you have to say here, what did the DPO advice provide? And you now state, okay, what is the compliance the DPO has advised here? And his summary is put on here. And then it has to be stated if the DPO's summary has been accepted or overruled. And it shows you, the consultation responses, the comments, and then who will be in charge of this DPIA. This DPIA will be kept and under review by. So someone is placed in charge of keeping this DPIA under review. Remember, I did tell you that the DPIA is not we shouldn't get into the habit of making a DPIA a one-off. It's not a one-off. It's something, it's a living document. It's a living document. So yeah, that is a sample of the DPIA. So I do have time for a couple of questions here. Someone asks, how do I determine the risk level? Risk levels really are calculated as the product of likelihood and impact. How likely is this risk that you've identified? How likely is the risk going to happen? And what is the impact to the data subject? So when those are put into place, that is when you now are able to calculate the severity of the risk. That is when you know it's called the probability index table, where you're now able to say, okay, what is the likelihood or probability of that happening and the impact. That is how it's actually that is how a risk level is actually calculated. Another question from okay. Another question here comes up and it says, how often should a DPIA be reviewed? I would say that it is actually dependent on the project and the organization, but the recommended time for a DPIA to be reviewed is every 3 years. Employers need to recognize that a DPIA, as I said, is a live and fluid process, and the recommended time for a review of a DPIA is 3 years. Is 3 years, but I believe, depending on, the impact or how important that process is to your organization, it can be reviewed, on a constant basis. Things change, things turn around. Well, we never expected this COVID-19 lockdown. How has it affected our processes even as we speak today? So it's a relative term, but 3 years is a recommended time for this to be checked. Oh, wow, this is a big question. Someone has asked me that in your experience, what are the common mistakes that could be made with the DPIA? Wow, I think the first thing I can mention as a common mistake would be sometimes, maybe, I don't know why, but it does happen quite a lot, is that we start off the DPIA a bit too late, because ideally, a DPI should begin before you actually start the processing. before any specific procedures and operations are designed, or any form of technology is actually purchased. That is actually the ideal time to start. Doing a DPI after the processing has already started, because if you've started afterwards, it actually leaves you with a number of difficult choices to make. But when you start it well in advance, you've been in a position to advise earlier on or what needs to be done. That famous thing, a stitch in time saves nine. That should take up with the DPIA. Another thing is that it's sometimes, because especially now that we have a template, it's a DPI is something that needs to be looked at comprehensively. You don't have to have a tick box kind of mentality. Oh, I've done this, I'll tick this off. I've done this, I'll tick this off. No, it has to, there should be some thinking going into it, adversarial thinking, getting individual views, taking note of the nature, the scope, the organizational capability. If it's a danger if your organization is treating the DPIA as a form filling exercise, it is anything but a form filling exercise. It needs to be as honest and as thorough as possible, and you never leave everything up to the DPO. That's another thing, because the data protection officer is the data protection officer. You now say, okay, everything data protection, just leave it up to DPO. No, that is a mistake to do. The DPO does have a role to play. The DPO will be able to identify who is needed there, but then again, the DPO cannot do everything. The DPO is not involved in every process, doesn't know the steps of every process. The DPO actually relies on the information which is given to him or her. And another thing is, another common mistake is, yes, treating the DPIA as, oh, it's done and dusted. We don't need to go back and check it. We've done it, just, fire and forget. No, the DPIA, as I've stated, is more than a one-time activity. It should be at the beginning, it's not set in stone forever. Things happen, things affect the process. You now go back and check, how do those things affect the process? And while checking that out, why don't you just do the DPI again, And having a good DPIA on paper, I know the ideal thing it should be, so I'm going to write my DPIA report according to what should ideally be. In other words, you're treating the paperwork separate from the reality. That is also a danger that I found that comes up sometimes, And to sum up everything that could go wrong with a DPIA is we must understand that it is a critical business record, and as such, the DPI must be identifiable. Number one, you must be able to identify that this is a DPI. You must be able to locate it. Someone can come and, probably doing an audit and say, where's your DPI? And you don't know where it is. That means you're not using it. And it should be retrievable, and most especially, it should be reliable, should have the accurate information inside. It should have the recommended inside. Oh, wow. I see my time has run out. And I do have a couple of questions that have come in. Yes. Someone, I can see a question coming, which I will take time and answer you in depth. The question is, if a DPO is responsible for establishing a data policy in line with risk appetite, then how can their advice be overruled? As I stated before, the DPO may not be involved in the actual process, so their knowledge may not be as comprehensive or as, frontline as the people that are actually involved in the process that is actually being assessed for the impact. So in as much as the DPO did establish the data policy, as you say, it is based on what the organizational ability and capacity has had to do and the process. But I will take my time and answer that in an email to you. I can see my time is up. Okay, says I think I have time for one more question. Let me see where Sarah, your question, is this sensitive personal data as determined by GDPR? Yes. Sensitive data, I'm not sure I get the question your answer. Is this sensitive personal data? Personally identifiable data, sensitive data goes under special sensitive data, special category data. Is it sensitive things that people should not know? Is it to your health, to your sexuality, and possibly all that? But I'm not sure to what you're referring this question. If you could be more specific, so I can really go into it. But when we're talking about personally identifiable data, yes, we are referring to what the GDPR refers to that. All right. Thank you so much for joining the webinar. As I said before, there are questions there, but my time is up, and I will take my time and follow you up on those questions. Remember, we are available for you. Please do get in touch, check the website out. Please send us an email at information@riscrew.com. That is our number there, 04020 3653124. Check out the website www.riscrew.com. That's where we're located, although you possibly can't come into the office now, but do get in touch with us. We're available for, and I will follow up with each and every one of your questions. Thank you very much. We do offer DPA 2018 and GDPR compliance services. Do get in touch, visit our website, or give us a call. Thank you very much once again, man. Ursula Baye for Riscrew. Thank you.